So now that should be streaming on YouTube. If somebody's commenting, it should show up here. You could type back and forth. You could probably move this one over. I can't. Just before that, what the hell that is. So if anybody's on YouTube, they might talk on there. Probably not. And then we're live on Dinner with Downey. We're good, right? Mm-hmm. We're a little late, but welcome to Dinner with Downey. Today we are without guests, so I thought I would show you how to make my most requested. What am I looking at here? My most requested pizza video or pizza recipe is my cornmeal crust. So today we're going to go through that from start to finish. We're going to start scheduling guests pretty soon. We're having a little bit of difficulties, and today we're running late because I don't know how to use a computer, so here we are. So, I wrote this book called the Chicago Pizza Cookbook. I published it myself on Amazon. It's available in the link on the video. It's got recipes, techniques. I've worked on this over a decade, taking notes, seeing what affects pizza crust as far as salt content, fermentation times, bread type or flour types, all kinds of that stuff. And in this book is page 104, 105, cornmeal crust pizza. That's what we're going to be working on today. So we're going to start from zero. I already have some dough made, but we're going to start from zero. First bit of information, or Matt, still there? First bit of information is if you don't have a kitchen scale that measures in grams, definitely worth the $10 to get one. It will make more consistent results, and you'll be able to see where your errors are happening, if any, a lot easier. So we're going to start with, this recipe will make 432 grams of dough, which is good for 2 12-inch thin crusts or 1 deep dish. And then the deep dish you could probably get away with as little as 300 grams on a 9-inch pan. But it's really up to preference at that point. I like my thin crust, which is what we're doing today, is thin crust. I always do 12-inch because that's just what I was set up for. And I run about 160 to 210 grams for a 12-inch thin crust as far as dough weight goes. So this will make 2 12-inch thin crust pizzas. We're going to start with our yeast. I prefer active dry yeast. You can get the instant yeast if you want, because every time I make pizza, I try to wait at least a day, sometimes 2 or 3 days. So the active dry yeast is my preferred choice, but you can go with the instant if you're going to make it in the morning and then make pizza that night. But I prefer the instant. So we're going to start with 3 grams of, or I prefer the active dry, sorry. 3 grams of dry yeast. And then we're going to zero out the scale. And then we're going to do 125 grams of water. You want to be as precise as you can when you're doing this. And if I over measure something, I'll take a note on it. Say, okay, this time I accidentally put too much salt. This time I didn't put enough of this. I didn't have enough time to wait around for the fermentation process or whatever it might be. But I take notes on it if I mess up a little bit or if something's a little bit off. In this case, I did 127 grams of water instead of 125. That's only 2 grams difference. I mean, we're talking less than 2%, around 1%, 1.25%, something like that. So not too worried about it at this point. So we're going to let that sit for 30 seconds to a minute to kind of come together, activate the yeast. And this recipe in particular, I generally don't put sugar in recipes unless I'm going to make it that day. I haven't found a consistency for sugar in dough. I blind taste tested a bunch of doughs that I made. I made thousands of pizzas and just numbered them. And then I would take notes on them, and then I'd look back and say, okay, where were the consistencies and stuff? And the ones with sugar and without sugar, I had no idea. I could not tell the difference in texture and flavor and browning, any of that. But if you're doing it the same day, I add sugar just to get the yeast active and hyper and excited to be there. So we're at our sugar now, which is 2 grams. So far we're at 3 grams of yeast, 125 grams of water. We're at 2 grams of sugar. And this is really going to get the yeast excited and moving. Something to feed off of. You can give it a stir if you want. And what I'm going to show you is I'm going to start with this dough hook. Here. I'm going to start with this dough hook. And the reason I'm going to start with this dough hook is because in my KitchenAid mixer, you know, however your mixer's set up, if I don't have enough dough in there, or the paddle, sorry, not the hook, dough paddle. The dough hook needs a little bit of substance to take it and knead it properly. So I start with the paddle, get everything together, and you'll see an overhead shot here in a second. And once I get it all coming together, I can take the paddle out and go to the hook. But until it actually forms a ball, the hook's just going to kind of move stuff around. It's not going to grab it and knead it. So we'll start with the paddle when we start. So we have our water, our yeast, and our sugar in there. And the one thing about making Chicago thin crust, or for me, this is my preference, I put everything in pretty much at the same time. You don't really have to worry about technique. I usually don't even let this proof. I would just put it all in there, mix it, put it in a container, put it in the fridge, and go to use it when I need it in 2, 3, 4 days. But it's good to get in the habit of building on this stuff. So we can add our salt, and salt prohibits yeast growth. It also prohibits long gluten strands from forming. So when we're putting salt in, what we're doing is we're going to have short gluten strands. So when we mix the dough, it's not going to be the long, pillowy, big air bubbles inside of the crust that you would get like in a New York crust or wood fire or, you know, French bread or anything like that. We are trying to constrain the gluten. We want tight, short, crispy gluten strands for what we're doing. So you can put everything in at once and mix it together. If you're doing most other types of pizza, whatever it might be, Detroit, New York, wood fire, there is a process to it. This process for the Chicago stuff, throw it in, blend it. 6 grams of cornstarch, corn oil. And if you are not familiar with corn oil, or you're not using that for stuff, it's incredibly unhealthy for you, but as far as flavor goes, it is one of the best oils and fats that you can use. You can substitute any fat you want, really, in pretty much any pizza recipe. I prefer the corn oil, the cornstarch, and the cornmeal in this just because it's that Midwestern feel to it. The cornstarch helps to keep it a little bit crisp, helps to dry out the crust a little faster. This is the only recipe I think I have that has cornstarch in it. Then we're going to go to cornmeal. You'll notice I have 2 types of cornmeal here. I'm going to use this cornmeal in the dough because it's a little finer. Over here. I'm going to use this cornmeal in the dough because it's a little bit finer. And then this is what we're going to use on the peel to prevent the pizza from sticking. And the reason is this is coarse ground. And so this is going to give us a lot more of that texture, that resistance, that bite. You feel a little grittiness on it when you're eating it. This is a finer cornmeal, so this is going to blend in a little bit more. So it's going to give us the flavor, a little bit of that texture of like cornbready texture, but it's not going to have the big pieces in it that you're going to be chewing on. So we do 38 grams of cornmeal. And this is the finer cornmeal. And then the final thing we do, so if you got a pen and paper, we'll go through this real quick. We did 3 grams of yeast, 125 grams of water, 2 grams of sugar, 2.5 grams of salt. I did the salt, right? Yeah. 38 grams of cornmeal, 6 grams of cornstarch, 44 grams of corn oil, and then the final ingredient is going to be 212 grams of Sarasota flour. If you are not familiar with Sarasota flour, It goes under 2 labels across the U.S. Sarasota, which we have here in the Midwest, and I believe out southeast, something like that. And then Hecker's brand, which is northeast and maybe west. Same flour, just under different labels. And the difference is you have gluten content is the biggest thing we're looking for or protein content is the biggest thing we're looking for here. All-purpose flour, which you can use, is softer, lower protein flour content, so less gluten. Sarasota has more than the all-purpose, so it's a little bit stronger. And then if you go to bread flour, that's even stronger. Bread flour is more of that like New York, give it a good tear, crisp happening. But for this combination with the cornmeal, and I've tried a ton of combinations with the cornmeal, and then there's recipes in here for semolina and whole wheat and stuff like that. This combination, the flour that works best with the cornmeal seems to be the Sarasota. Bread flour is a little bit too tight, dry. What would you say? Not crispy, it's like past crispy. Not burnt, but like tough. It's just bread flour is just too tough for this recipe for whatever reason. Sarasota flour works really well, and all-purpose flour doesn't hold the crisp as well. So Sarasota is what we're going for here. So we're going to go with 212 grams of Sarasota flour. And your first instinct, especially if you're new in the kitchen, is probably just to start dumping this in there till you get to where you want to be. But you will learn after you make a few mistakes. It's best to use a tool, spoon or whatever, to get where you want to go. So now we have our Sarasota flour. This is enough dough for 2 12-inch thin crusts or 1 9-inch deep dish. And we're going to start with, I'll go to this one. So you can see, we're only filled up to here. Huh? This one's not working? More technical difficulties, eh? All right, so can you activate and deactivate it? Still glitching? What is up, next gen? I wonder if it's the extension. The light went on and then off. Bear with us a second. Still glitching? All right, well, why don't we take this camera and kind of hold it over here for a second. This one is? What the shit, man? If you're on our Facebook Live, we are glitching on our other cameras, so it's experiment day here. So we have our dough in our mixing bowl. We're going to add our paddle. This is the paddle, not the dough hook. And the reason, again, is because the dough hook needs a little bit of substance in there to really knead it around, and we just don't have that with this. So we're going to do 2 minutes like this, and you'll see when it starts to come together, it does it real quick. Glitching? This one? Huh. I wonder what the issue is. All right, so now we came together. So now we can switch to the hook, or you can stick with the paddle. I've done it with the paddle too. Either way it works. So now they came together, we'll put the hook on, which is this guy. There's the bowl. And then you'll see it'll come together now. It wouldn't do that before. There's just not enough in there. And then you would let this go for about 2 minutes. I'm not going to make you guys sit here and wait for that. I already have some dough done. Plus Michelle's arms are tired, so we'll kill that. You can put that back down now. We got any tech experts out there? All right, so if you're just joining us, we're doing recipes from the Chicago Pizza Cookbook. It's a book I wrote. It's on Amazon in the link below. We're working on page 104, 105 today. It's a cornmeal crust. We just went through the process of actually making the dough, and that is enough for 2 12-inch thin crust pizzas. We are done with these cornmeal and cornstarch. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a 12-inch thin crust as normal. And then I actually have 2 that I rolled out about 2 hours ago, and they're just air curing. And that's a different technique, and we'll go into that here in a second. But for now, we'll roll out and make a pizza. So what we do is called bench flour. Take all-purpose flour or Sarasota, whatever you're using in your pizza, is usually what I do. So we use Sarasota in the dough. So I'll use Sarasota for rolling it out. Hello? That's just hands. And then get an apron. Wipe off on your apron. So this is dough that I made. Can you see me? This is dough that I made Saturday and put in the. I let it proof and I knocked it down, and then I put it in the refrigerator. And today is Tuesday, so we have 4-day ferment here, which for me is ideal. 3 to 5 days is usually what I go for. You can go up to a week, you can go over a week. At a week, the yeast starts dying off, and that will affect your results of the rise that you get if you go to bake your pizza, but it will also affect the flavor. It'll be very intense, sharp, almost like a real sharp cheese flavor, as the alcohol turns into other gases from the yeast in the fermentation process. It'll soften up. It's pretty harsh at first, so it tastes very yeasty on day 1. 8 hours into day 1, very yeasty flavor. The longer you let the yeast work, the softer the yeast flavor and the more of the fermented flavor. You kind of like sourdough would be, I guess. So for purposes that I like 3 to 5 days. 4 days is great for fermentation. You can smell the alcohol. It's like a sweet alcohol as opposed to a very pungent alcohol, which it would be early on, and then later on it'll be less alcohol-y and more like a sharper mono almost flavor and scent. You can roll out your dough to whatever desired thickness you like. Like I said earlier, when I go real thin, I'm at like 160, 170 grams for a 12-inch pizza. A regular crust, I consider probably like 185 to 210. And then over 210 is like a thicker, I guess you would call them like double dough up here. We'll roll out our dough wider than we need it. So we're going to trim it. And the nice thing about this dough, it tears, but it doesn't tear very easy. But you can stretch it like this. I can play with it because it's not all gluten. There's a lot of cornmeal in there. It's kind of cutting out the gluten, the salt that we put in early on, the fat we put in early on. All those things help to keep the gluten tight and small. So we can play with it a little bit like this. After you roll out your dough, I'm more of a results kind of guy, not a looks kind of guy. So more rustic pizzas is my preferred method. So we rolled it out. We'll give it a little bit of a shimmy like this. And what that's going to do is, because we just rolled it out, we got the gluten tense, like tensed up. When we do a little lift like this, we're letting the gluten relax, come in, and it'll be closer to the 12 inches after it's baked. If we put it in, if we just rolled it out right away and I didn't do this process, it's going to shrink a lot in the oven, and it might shrink too much. So by simply lifting it up and letting air go underneath it and letting it come in on itself, we'll be more true to a 12-inch pizza. If you have a pan, you could use a pan, pizza pan. I use my pizza cardboards or circles. People have different terms for them. And I go slightly, if you see I'm holding the cutter, a slight angle. So I'm at like 12 1/8 inches. So I'm adding an 1/8 inch on each side, which gives us a 1/4 inch total, because it's going to pull back a little bit in the oven. And this will help to counteract that. Not perfectly, but it will help. The nice thing about this dough, or one of the nice things about this dough, is I can take my scrap, which I incorporated some flour in, but not a lot. I can mix it back in with the leftover dough. In an hour or two, I can come back and make another pizza with it. It's a very forgiving dough, this cornmeal crust. I'll weigh this just so you can see. My guesses were like 180 to around 180. Zero out my scale. And then this is a pizza docker. I'm going to dock it before I weigh it. And this is going to prevent some of the air bubbles from forming in the pizza. That's all it's doing. So basically, if you can see each dot from the docker, the air bubbles can only form in between the two dots. So the biggest air bubble we'll get would be, the thumbprint worth, in theory. So, we're at 209, 206. 206 grams for this 12-inch. So it'll be a little thicker. You can go down to this recipe probably 170. Because if you go too thin, it will break on you. And then trick number 1. We're gonna cook our pizza on a stone. Right over here, still. We're gonna cook our pizza on a stone. So we have to get it on the stone somehow. To do that, we use a pizza peel. I found the wooden pizza peel is much more forgiving to work on and launch the pizza, and then a metal pizza peel to take the pizza out. It just makes it easier, and why not make it easy on yourself? So we're going to dust our peel, and you can use flour, you can use semolina, you can use cornmeal, you can use breadcrumbs. Because this is my cornmeal crust, I go with cornmeal just to keep it a little bit consistent, because we're going to have those textures in there. You don't want to go too crazy with this. This is coarse cornmeal again. You don't want to go too crazy with this, because anything you put on this peel, it's going to go into the oven. And if it's not benefiting you making the pizza, it's just going to become more dirty stuff in your oven. And then you're going to have to clean it out. Like I said, this is a very forgiving dough, so you can play with it, stretch it, pull it by hand a little bit, make it shape it if you want. And then all along the process as we're doing this, we're going to give it a shake every now and again. What that's going to do, so what's happening right now is that we have hydration in our dough. And that hydration naturally wants to get expelled. When it gets expelled from the dough, it goes onto the peel. In this case, with the wood peel, it's kind of wicks it away, which is good. The cornmeal is giving it a little bit of air in between the peel and the dough, and so that way some of the moisture can escape. Not all of it, some of it. So as we shake it, we're preventing the dough from sticking to the peel, basically. And the cornmeal works really well. I'd say the best thing is breadcrumbs to prevent the sticking. In my experience, people argue with me on that, but in my experience, breadcrumbs give you the most time from rolling out your dough and putting it on the peel to it sticking. But as long as you keep shaking, keeping it free, you're probably good. Right? So now we're going to do sauce. I prefer crushed tomatoes. I like a very bright tomato, something that hasn't been heavily processed. Because we're going to be topping these with some pretty intense ingredients, you can use, this is Di Fratelli or Di Fratelli, I don't know how you pronounce it. What did we just pay for these, $2.50? What's that? There's nothing down there. Oh. I think these are like $2.50 to give you an idea. And they're very good tomatoes if you're putting a lot of toppings on. If you're going with a very simple pizza, you want to do like a, just a cheese or like maybe a Mediterranean or something like that. Some tomatoes like this, but these were what, $5? These are $5 today. These are very bright, very fresh tasting compared to these. These are great, especially if you're doing a lot of toppings. These are great if you're doing very simple pizza. It's kind of just you get in your own head a little bit sometimes. All the measurements are in the book, but I usually, for a regular amount of sauce, it's like 80 grams. If you're going light, you can go 60. If you're going heavy, you can go to 100, 105, 110. And also the type of tomatoes, like these are fairly dry tomatoes, so you can go a little bit heavier. If you get a very wet tomato, you want to go much lighter. And what did we use when we went to Jimmy's? Do you remember? I think it was a Lessie, but it wasn't crushed. Oh, no, it was Poppy. The cardboard was way too chunky. It was way too liquidy. So it's chunks and liquid as opposed to like a well-blended. I don't know, can you see this really well?
Yeah, I see it.
So this is like a good blend as far as moisture content goes for the crushed tomatoes. These here, These were much wetter, so these you should probably drain a little bit before you use them. Because anything that's wet that's going on your pizza, you have to bake it off. And if you don't get it baked off, then your crust is going to suffer. You're going to get a little bit wet, soggy, and we don't want that. So now for seasoning, I like this is Chicago Downey's Perfect Pizza Seasoning. It's available on Amazon, Walmart, my website. Just shake some on there. And then we do Romano, or I like Romano. You could do sharp provolone, you could do Parmesan. I feel like Parmesan doesn't have enough flavor. My preference, and I think the most used out here is Parmesan, or Romano. Pecorino Romano, the real sharp goat's cheese, which I'm having difficulty finding at the moment. At least at some kind of decent pricing. This should be about 12 to 15 grams, if I remember correctly. Really should write notes for these things, huh? Used to shooting these by myself. Very Bob Ross style of shooting. Give it a shake, make sure it's still loose. And then what should we do for our first pizza? Just typical Chicago? Sausage, pepper, onion? Alright, so Chicago thin crust, sausage, pepper, onion, or sausage, pepper, onion, mushroom. Very, very common. So we'll do that. So when you're making your pizza, you want to remember you can put stuff under the cheese, which we're going to do. The stuff that goes under the cheese should be drier because it's not going to let the moisture escape out as it's baking. So your wet ingredients generally go on top of the cheese, and your drier ingredients go under the cheese. And that will prevent them from burning, stuff like that. So for under the cheese, I prefer the onions under the cheese for sure. But this is all preference. You do what makes you happy. And then this is yellow onion. I like the yellow onion a little bit more because it's not as pungent as a white onion. I feel like white onion is the preferred choice for most people. I like yellow. I like a little bit sweeter. I don't add any sugar to the sauce, which is a very common thing out here. Adding some kind of sweetener to the sauce. I don't like doing that. I'm okay with this. And then pepper. Pepper is one of those things that can go above or below the cheese. It's really a preference thing. But because I'm putting mushrooms on this pizza, I'm going to put the peppers underneath the cheese. So there's not too many wet ingredients on top trying to expel their moisture. And then you can cut these in rings. You could dice them. I did all this by hand today. I would have preferred using a mandolin. Another tip for doing your toppings, especially your vegetable toppings, if you do them the day before, you'll be much better off. Cut them however you want to dice them or slice them, or I put them in quarters and then slice the quarters for this time. And then put a paper towel in there. And that way, while it's in the fridge, instead of all the moisture staying in there, the towel will absorb some of that moisture, which is then less moisture that has to escape in our baking process. And what we're looking for with Chicago thin crust, most particularly, is a nice crisp to it. And so the more wet stuff we're putting on it, the less likely we are to have crisp at the end. Crisp is the word of the day. Sausage. So we're going to put sausage under the cheese too. Now, if you're not from the Chicago area or, Midwest, I think in Rockford and St. Louis, they do it the same way. We put raw sausage on, we put it under the cheese. It's in the oven long enough at high enough temperature that the sausage will actually cook, so you don't have to worry about, raw sausage eating that. But I don't like going on top of the cheese because it dries the sausage out. So we're going to put the sausage under the cheese. This was just some local sausage that all I did was add some fennel to it. It's mild Italian, and then I added a little bit of fennel. I make my own sausage. I made some, when did we do that? Last week? We made some sausage last week, but I do a coarse grind. I did that time. I usually do a coarse grind for cased sausage, like in the links. That is my preference, especially for Italian. But what I wanted to do was get like a medium grind in there. I just didn't do it. So this is bought. I added fennel to it. Wash our hands. Really disappointed this camera didn't work. Aren't you? Yeah, we're experimenting a little bit today. A lot of it lately. trying to get our feet on the ground for this cooking video series. I am on this side of the camera. And I like that. I do not know much about computers. Everybody's going to go, oh, he touched the raw sausage and then he's doing this. We're going to cook all of this, so I'm not worried about that. So hide those comments for yourself. All right, so we have sausage, pepper, and onion underneath. We'll do mushrooms on top. And what I like most of the time, not all the time, this is whole milk mozzarella. Low moisture whole milk mozzarella. I like to do about a 50-50 mix of this and deli provolone, not sharp provolone, the stuff you get like, you know, in the little half moons. This is deli provolone. Well, this is whole milk mozzarella, but this here is deli provolone, which is not smoked. It's not really as sharp, but it is drier, so it gives a lot of consistency to the pizza, like a little bit of pull, chew to it. And that is what I'm going for. This is a little heavy on the cheese, but I like cheese. And now mushrooms. Do some mushrooms. We'll give it another shake here, right? Because if we stick, we're going to run into a world of problems. We don't want to stick. So these mushrooms, and there's a recipe for it in the cookbook, I saute them in butter and white wine, either Chardonnay or Pinot Grigio usually. Salt. And that's it. Just cook them down until almost all of the liquid is evaporated. And then for these mushrooms in particular, I like them on top of the cheese because they can dry out a little bit. If you're doing raw mushrooms and you're not sauteing, those ones you can put under the cheese if you want so they don't dry out. Canned mushrooms, if you're doing canned mushrooms, I would definitely put that on top of the cheese as well. So we're going to come loose, which is a good sign. And then I'll put this in and I'll get back to you guys on this. So this is going to go in 500 degrees, right on the stone. And that takes a little bit of practice to get it off the peel. We'll check it in 10 minutes. We probably don't even need 10 minutes actually because this oven was overheated. It's been on for a long time, so the stone is blazing hot right now. But what I did is I set the oven up. There's two ways to set the oven up, one for thin crust and one for deep dish. And I have diagrams. Where am I going? I have diagrams in the book for both. The deep dish, you're going to... deep dish we won't worry about, you're doing thin crust only today. For the thin crust, I put a stone on the lowest rack possible. And in this oven, it's maybe an inch off the base. The rack. It's like very low down there. I haven't seen one that low. So it's very low and that stone gets very hot. Our oven only goes to 500 degrees, but that stone goes to 570, 580 because it's so close to the heating source. That's where I start my pizza. That's going to cook the crust. That's going to help bring everything to a high temperature real fast. And as it's cooking, I set up a stone. Oh, I set up a stone a while ago. It's one rack below top usually, so you're like 3 or 4 inches from the top. And what we can do is we can move the pizza from the bottom stone, which is a very hot bottom, but not a lot of heat on top of it. We can take the pizza and put it up top, and the top of the oven there reflects the heat back on top of the pizza, and that helps dry out the ingredients. It helps brown the cheese. It helps to cook the top faster than the bottom, which is a problem you probably run into. Your bottom is cooking too fast and your top isn't cooking enough, so you either have to put on less toppings or less wet toppings. So this is a way to counteract that, because all pizzas are different. So we have one stone on the bottom, as low as the rack goes, and one just below the top. And in our case, it's about 3 inches from the top. On the bottom, I'm actually using a granite stone, like countertop. And on the top today, I have a regular pizza stone. In this book, it's a lot of note-taking over the years. I might actually have those tomatoes I was talking about earlier here. There you go. I think these are the Alessi that I took a picture of. You can see how wet they are. Yeah? Yeah, wet. But also in this book, it has toppings as far as weights and measures go. How much you would use on a 12-inch thin crust, how much you would use on a 9-inch deep dish. And that's all this stuff here. I have pictures galore. I have the cured crust recipe, which we'll go into next. That's just a technique more than a recipe. How to cut a 12-inch pizza into squares. Sounds stupid, but if you're not from the area. Makes sense. Laminating process, which again is the process over. It's more of a technique than a recipe. Then I have recipes like Lou Malnati's. My Lou Malnati's knockoff. I grew up by Lou Malnati. We ate Lou Malnati's a lot as a kid. Deep dish. The ingredient weights for deep dish and where they would go. When you're layering in for a deep dish as well, toppings in a certain sequence makes sense. And then I have a recipe for the school lunch pizza. I don't know if you guys had this growing up. Came in the big rectangle. It's a little wetter of a dough. It's more like it's a wet Sicilian, or like a mix of a Detroit and grandma pizza, I guess. I have wild recipes in here, like using Italian beef gravy fat in the dough. Whole wheat semolina, sourdough dough, cheese fat. I was on WGN a couple months ago. And this is what I did, the rendered cheese fat crust. If you saw that, that's also in this book, and all of the links for this book are below. Correct. So we put the pizza in at 500 degrees on the lowest stone, and I put the timer on for 9 minutes. And the reason I did that is because this is my first pizza going in, and if the stone sits in the oven and the oven's set to 500 degrees, the stone will get much hotter than it's actually set to. And the more time you have in between your first pizza and your second pizza, the more the stone's going to reheat. So the first time you fire a pizza in the oven, it is blazing hot, and so usually it doesn't take as long. And I will most likely have to move this from the bottom stone to the top stone for that reason. Right? That looks good, smells good. So while that's cooking, this is the same dough that we just made 20 minutes ago, whatever it was. I rolled it out, I docked it, and I put it on cornmeal on a parchment sheet. And what's happening right now is that the hydration is escaping. It's called curing the crust. So there's a little bit of a skin on here. This has only been about 2 hours, so it's near perfect. You can leave it as long as you want, and eventually, see now it's pliable and flexible. Eventually it gets to the point where it cracks, and I don't like that. This to me is perfect. So what we're actually going to do is, this is the side that dried out a little bit, and this is the side you can see how the parchment paper is a little wrinkly, and the reason is the moisture's escaping the dough, but it has nowhere to go, so it sits on the parchment paper. If this was a peel, like a metal peel, it'd be sticking to the peel, but it eventually is working its way out. But what we're going to do is, this drier side is going to become our bottom. It's already got a head start on crisping up. So this will be our bottom, and this will be our top. We'll flip it onto the peel. And actually, there's no damage in making this now, so we can make it while the other one's cooking. Sure. Questions?
Do you strain the crushed tomatoes?
Do you strain the crushed tomatoes? So this brand comes, where's the camera? This D Fratel. This one is like the perfect consistency already as is. There's no need to strain that. Some of them, Pomi, P-O-M-I, comes in a carton. Those definitely have to get strained, and those are more diced than crushed. These Alessi ones, I'll open them up so we could just do, as long as we're doing this, right? Just give me an excuse to make pasta or some shit. Right? So these Alessi brand tomatoes are beautiful. They're very bright, slightly acidic, but they are a wetter consistency. So here we'll go. This is Dave Fratel. I think Hunt's is pretty much the same. Red Gold is pretty much the same consistency as this. Dave Fratel or Tudorusso is another good one. But this is the consistency of that one. And this one, you can see that it's slightly wetter. So putting this through a fine mesh strainer and just getting a little bit of this liquid out would not hurt. So straining the tomatoes really depends on the tomatoes themselves.
You use oregano.
Well, I use the Chicago Pizza Perfect Pizza Seasoning. This is a blend I developed based off of the pizzas that I ate growing up. It's crushed red pepper, garlic, onion, oregano, basil, salt, and it's just a really good blend. A lot of places will just do oregano. It's oregano, maybe crushed red pepper, Romano, sometimes salt. I haven't really seen salt around too much. But you can just season it with oregano if you want. I'm not a person that really pushes sticking to the rules. I mean, you do what you like and what is best. That's what I'm a fan of. For me, I like this because you put it on top of the sauce, right? So you're not putting the crushed tomatoes and you're not blending it together. You still taste the tomatoes, you get the texture of the tomatoes, but then you get this flavor is scattered throughout as opposed to it being blended in. All right, so we're at 9 minutes on the bottom stone. My guess is we're going to go to the top for a minute or two, and we do. So this is what we look like right now, which is actually really good. We could probably keep this on the bottom for the next minute or two. But we're going to go on top to try and dry out, brown the cheese a little bit more. We really only need another minute on there. So we're 10 minutes total on this one. We're going to be probably 11 or 12 minutes for the next one. The reason being is we just baked the pizza on that stone. The pizza was room temperature. The stone was blazing hot. They meet somewhere in the middle, and now the stone has to come back up. And it takes a while. It's a very thick stone. The granite's, what, an inch thick probably? It's not an inch thick stone, so it really takes time to heat up. I'll take it right out and put it on here so we can see it. And then we'll cut it after we make the next one. These here too, if you can get these. This is like $9. Just for cutting the pizza, it makes it so much easier. So I use this to turn the pizza, but to cut it, it's kind of a pain in the ass. It's a pizza rocker. It makes short work of it. This camera's still glitching. Oh, that's a shame. This would have been a good shot. So this is pretty much perfect. This is a cornmeal crust, so the browning is about as good as it gets here. It doesn't have a whole lot of dark spotting, this one, because it's not a whole lot of white flour. You do just the white flour pizzas, you get a lot of the real dark spots or light spots. This one doesn't have it. It's too hot for me to lift up and show you right now. We're going to let it cool for a minute, and then we'll cut it and I'll show you the bottom of it. You can see it's a little thicker than these cured ones are going to be this next one that we're doing. But that's just because of the way it rolled out. I could have rolled it a little bit thinner. This was, what did I say, 205 grams, which is like a normal thin crust. You can go down to 160 is like ultra thin, 180 is really thin, 200 is average, I guess. And you go to like 210, 220, you can get like a double dough or thicker crust. The thicker the crust you do, the harder it is to get crispy. You're going to have more of a soft inside, maybe a crispy shell. The thinner you go, the harder it is to hold up the toppings. So there's a balance, and you're going to play with it. There's notes about that in the book. There's a balance that you will find your preference for. We're going to let this cool for a second, then we'll cut it. And while we're letting it cool, we'll move to our cured crust. So again, it's the same dough, it's the cornmeal dough. So I use cornmeal McPeel. This is more of a coarse grind or medium coarse. Bob's Red Mill. The cornmeal that we used in the dough was a fine cornmeal, and that's because I wanted to absorb the moisture. I don't want it to be as gritty. And then this is the cornmeal dough that I rolled out a couple hours ago. Docked it, trimmed it, and I just put it on parchment paper with a little bit of cornmeal on it. And now this side dried out a little bit. This is called curing the crust. This one's already a little bit dry, so I want this side to be on the bottom. Just got to jump start in the crisping, right? It's still pliable, which is perfect. If you let it go too long, it will dry out. And then I got world issues there. So we have our cured crust. What do we want for toppings on this one? So we're going to do the same process from here. You can keep your peel with as little filth as possible. You'd be better off because you're going to have to clean it out of the oven eventually anyway. And we're still going to do shakes, even though this, you can hear it, can you hear it? Well, you can hear it here. Because of the drier bottom side, it slides around like an air hockey table. That's perfect. So again, simply crushed tomatoes, unseasoned. All the weights and measures are in the cookbook, as far as how much sauce to use, tips, tricks, what's a light sauce, heavy sauce, shit like that. And as far as tomatoes go, these day for tell, I like, because we load these up. You saw the last one was sausage, pepper, onion, had provolone cheese, and butter wine mushrooms. So they butter wine mushrooms on top. There's a lot happening on that one. We don't need a really bright, fresh, expensive sauce for that. If I was doing a cheese or maybe just like a margarita, something like that, I'd want a brighter tomato. So then we do seasoning. I like Chicago Downey's pizza seasoning. Obviously, I make it. And again, by not blending this into the sauce, or the crushed tomatoes, we're getting different layers happening. If I was to blend this all together, the whole sauce would taste very similar, more homogeneous. I am a very big fan of layers, different textures, pops of flavor, less homogeneous type stuff. But it's preference. It's all preference. That's just what I like. I like it to be everybody a little bit different, but on the same. It's all in the same field. It's just a little bit different. We do spinach, tomato, garlic. That'd be a good one, huh? Spinach, tomato, garlic. You sure? All right. Okay, so we're gonna do spinach, tomato, garlic. The tomatoes obviously are a wet ingredient. They're gonna go on top. I simply cut these a couple hours ago. Put them in a container with a paper towel on top to get some of that moisture out. The spinach I sauteed a couple hours ago. Simply in Chardonnay, salt, granulated garlic, and butter. Low heat, and just keep cooking until the moisture is pretty much out there. There's some moisture still in the bottom of the container, but it should stay in the container. Spinach again, very wet ingredient. We'll put that one on top. And garlic. This is just simply garlic that's been minced. This can go on top or on bottom. I'm going to put it on bottom, and I have a very unique way of putting this on. I don't know if anybody else does this. It might be stupid, but this is how I do it. So I take my minced garlic here. This is not from a jar, this is fresh minced. I got like little hunks here. Just kind of release some while I throw it, or take it and flick it, kind of like you're flicking water on you're doing like pie crust or something. I find that this is a good way to disperse the garlic. If you put the garlic on top of your cheese, it's going to have a little bit more bitterness as it heats up and cooks at a high temperature very fast. You put it under the cheese, it's a little more sweet, mellow, and less bitter, I guess. Let me rinse my hands off. All right, so then we're going to add some sharp cheese. You can do sharp provolone, you can do Romano, you can do Parmesan, Fontanella, whatever sharp cheese you want. This is Romano. It's not Pecorino Romano because I'm having trouble finding that at any kind of reasonable price right now. I think it was $12 a pound. And that is too much for my blood. So this is regular Romano. Again, this is a very heavy flavor combination on the toppings. So this Romano is perfectly fine. If you're doing very simple pizzas, you want very high quality ingredients. If you're doing loaded pizzas, the quality doesn't have to be as peak. So for this is $5 wedge of Romano, right? $4, something like that. As opposed to the Pecorino Romano, which, again, I'm doing very simple pizza. The Pecorino Romano is really going to pull through. And this is not going to pull through as much. So we're okay with this. So we did the garlic. We're going to do the whole milk mozzarella. And if you were watching on the other pizza, I went a little bit heavy on the cheese. And that was okay because there weren't a lot of wet ingredients. The other one was sausage, pepper, onion, and then butter, white mushrooms on top. And because it wasn't a whole lot of wet ingredients, that worked out. This is going to have very wet spinach and wet tomatoes. So we want to go light on the cheese because it's a very thin dough. If I was to increase the thickness of this dough a little bit, then I would be able to cook it longer and it would hold up a little bit better. But it's very thin dough. It's very wet ingredients. So there's just things to be mindful of when you're putting your pizzas together. And for this, we want to go pretty light on the cheese. So we're good there. Tomatoes, a couple things. When you get the end of the tomato, you can throw them out, or I just flip them so that the skin side is down. And these are Campari something or other tomatoes. They're little, they're not cherry tomatoes. Is Campari the brand or the style? They can't, I don't think. My dog is whining for some cheese. I don't think you guys could hear that. I don't have the cheese. So be conscious. I usually use Roma, or I like Roma. I use whatever you got. I like Roma tomatoes. They're drier, they're crisper, the textures are a little bit more. These are Campari. They have much richer flavor. I'm curious about this. Yeah, Sunset's the brand, so Campari is the type of tomato. They taste more like garden tomatoes. I don't know if you've had garden tomatoes compared to stuff you buy at the store. These taste more like greenhouse garden tomatoes. So they're going to be a little bit more flavor. Great. And then spinach. I like to put spinach on last if I'm using spinach because I saute this in butter, wine, a little bit of granulated garlic. It's very wet. And so if I put this underneath anything, it's not going to expel any of that moisture. The hydration is in there. And then we can go back to questions in a moment once I get this one in the oven. So again, this is the cured crust, which the techniques are in the cookbook. Spinach, less is more, I feel like, especially because if you get like a big chunk, it leaves way too much wet happening. So all I'm doing with my right hand is trying to spread it out and feel for basically a stem. And once I get a stem, I know I just have one or two leaves there, and that's all I want. I don't want big chunks of the spinach. It will not dry out. And then you're going to be disappointed in yourself. All of this work, and then you have issues. Another note is that if you get anything wet on your peel, it's going to cause issues. So I have two tomato seeds right here, which you're not going to be able to see no matter how I do it. But when I go to shake it, it's going to get caught on the wet tomato parts. The dough sticks on that part, but the rest of the pizza moves, and you're going to mess in your oven. So make sure you have a clean peel. Anything that's on the peel that's not going to help cook the pizza is just going to burn in the oven. So it's better just to prevent that. Make sure you're still loose because it's a cured crust. No problems here. We're going to go in on the bottom stone again. This is a cured crust. It's thinner than the last one. We did light on the cheese, so we're probably going to do 7 or 8 minutes on the lower stone. And then we're going to move to the top because we really want these tomatoes and the spinach to dry out. We're not going to get that just on the bottom stone. So let's try it out. We'll start the timer at 7 minutes. Go from there. So again, wooden peel to put the pizza in the oven, and then metal peel to take out. It's my preference. This is what I like. So I was talking about before we put this pizza in the oven, trying to stretch it a little bit because it shrinks, it contracts, especially this cornmeal crust recipe, and it does. I don't know if you can see the bottom. You see it? There's a beautiful looking pizza. But you can see it shrunk a little bit anyway. That's just what it does. The sides, especially, probably because of the way I shaped it. But we're still 12 inches here. Side is just oddly shaped with a Josh mistake. That happens all the time. Make sure under your cardboard is clean, because if I go to cut it and there's cornmeal on here, it's going to shoot out. We don't want that. So here. Oh god, I love this part. So this pizza rocker makes short work of a pizza. They're like $9 or $10, you get one. So this is our regular cornmeal crust pizza. The one that's in the oven right now is the cured crust. This one's not working, right? Yeah. So this is sausage, pepper, and onion underneath the cheese, and then butter, wine, mushrooms on top of the cheese. Mushrooms are usually an optional thing when you're doing this kind of pizza in Chicago. And cornmeal crust is becoming more and more rare. Everybody's asking me, where do you get cornmeal crust pizzas? And there's only a couple places I could think of. And it must have been a thing that was popular back in the day, because I get a lot of older customers asking me about it. Cornmeal crust recipe. I like the corners. Kind of ironic. It's really not a corner. This is my preferred part. You can see there's no flap. This one's going a little bit, but not bad. It's so hot still. I'll eat the corner. You can probably hear it. I got 2 mics on right now. Let's see what happens. The first thing you get is the texture of the crust, and because of the cornmeal, I describe it as like a resistance, or like a bite to it. It's not a clean cut through. So you get that immediately. You get a little bit of that like stone baked like char, which is beautiful. And you get the acidity from the tomatoes. And tomatoes are a very important part of making pizzas. Dave Fertel does a good job, and that price range is probably top of the line. Lassie is fantastic. But again, when you're looking to spend money on where to spend it, this is a pretty loaded pizza. So we're putting really high quality, expensive tomatoes on here, they're going to get lost. I like this Dave Fertel because it's got the right consistency, it's got some acidity to it, it's got some sweetness. And then you get the herbs from the seasoning, sharpness of the cheese, the Romano. And then you get a little bit of like that funk from the provolone, a little bit of resistance, a little bit of that pull. Then you get the vegetable flavors as well. Oh. And then right at the end, you get a little bit of like cornbread taste. Just a hint at the end. So it's sweet, it's acidic. You get a little bit of salt. I wouldn't say it's salty, but you taste some salt. You get some freshness, you get some brightness, you get some dark flavors. This is a beautiful combination for pizzas. Cornmeal crust, sausage, pepper, onion, and butter wine mushrooms. So the butter wine mushrooms, I simply take these for portobello, slice them up, cut them in half from a flat side down, slice them pretty thin, put it in a pot, some butter, a little bit of olive oil, salt, and then wine, put a lid on it. Once the butter melts and it's cooking, take the lid off, reduce all the liquid out of there, and then the mushrooms start to get a little bit there, a little bit there, and they get this beautiful brown on them. We need a hero shot. That's what we need, is a hero shot camera, which would have been this one. I could have shown you guys what's going on here. Oh, glitching. Glitches happen. That might be one of my favorite pizzas combinations. I'm curious to see. This is the first time we're doing the, I can remember, the cornmeal crust with the spinach, tomato, garlic. So this is my cookbook, the Chicago Pizza Cookbook. It's available on Amazon. It's in the link below. This recipe was for the cornmeal crust pizza, which is page 104 and 105. This cornmeal crust is unique because most people say a cornmeal crust when they're really talking about is the cornmeal dusting on the peel. This is cornmeal in the dough. And because of that, I definitely don't like to use the same day. Try not to use it next day. If I can have it in day 3, 4, or 5, it gives the cornmeal a little bit more time to kind of absorb the hydration from the water. Otherwise, the earlier in the process that you make this pizza, like you're doing it same day or next day, the more gritty it's going to be because the cornmeal hasn't fully softened from the hydration. But also in this book, we have a bunch of recipes, experiment results, notes, techniques, this chapter on tomatoes, chapter on cheeses, where to cut costs. Because this was a garbage pizza. This was one of the we use scalded milk, and if you do that, it really tightens up the gluten. That's paper thin. This was like 4 or 5 post-it notes thick. It was ridiculous, but it was a loaded pizza and it held up because the scalded milk tightens up the gluten, and so it's very tense and tight like cracker you. All right, so we're at 7 minutes on the bottom stone. This is a cured crust pizza, so I could probably move it to the top because this is all wet ingredients. And what? Yep. I'll show you real quick. So you can see that the crust itself is cooking very well. Actually, we're not doing bad on the toppings. There's a good amount of cheese and topping ratio to this crust. But I do want more browning. And I do want the spinach to dry a little bit more. So we're going to put this in the top stone. And I'll show you the diagram here in a second. Another 2 minutes. And I would call that good. So this was a cured, what's coming out of the oven now? It was a cured crust, which just meant that I rolled it out and I left it exposed to the air for a couple hours. It helped it form a skin on the top, and then I flipped it so that skin side is on the bottom, and it's going to crisp up real nice. We put it into an oven set up for thin crust, which all this stuff's in the book too. In this thin crust oven, we have 1 stone on the bottom, and then 1 stone towards the top. We start on the bottom because we really want that crust to crisp up as best possible. This pizza in particular has tomatoes and spinach with both very wet ingredients, so the top isn't going to brown as nice. There's the heat. If you look at here's the stone, this is where you cook in the bottom. All the air has this much space to move around in, so the top isn't getting cooked as much. So you move from the bottom stone to the top stone, and then there's nowhere for the air to go, so it's reflecting off the top of the oven and back onto the top of the pizza. That's going to help dry out our spinach, dry out our tomatoes, brown our cheese. Just all around good. Let this one come out in about 45 seconds, and then we got to start scheduling guests. Guests. So dinner with Downey. We got a live cooking show. We've already run into issues. We definitely cannot just do 1 day a week like Tuesday or some shit. We have to spread it out. So it is what it is, but we're going to re-air it live. So we'll film it live, air it live. We'll take that. We're not going to edit it. We're just going to publish it live too. I'm really excited about that. First one turned out really good. Episode 1 is out with the old Hank Winky. Check it out. So we did 7 minutes on the bottom stone, and then we did 2 minutes on the top stone, and you can see how fucking beautiful that looks. The cheese browned much better just sitting on the top. The spinach started to, when spinach dries out, the ends kind of shrivel and you get like a lump in it. This is perfect. Those tomatoes are fucking gorgeous. The color is hot. It's hot as shit right now. Can I see it though? Look at that. God, you can smell the garlic. So because I put the garlic underneath the cheese, it cooks slower, and it's going to have a more mild garlic sweetness to it. If you put your garlic on top of the cheese, it's going to cook really fast at a high temperature. And it's going to get a little bit of that bitterness, which is not bad. I still like that as well. But with this combination of being more an earthy, softer flavors happening, darker flavors, the garlic underneath works really well. Let's cut this bad boy up, huh? So this one, look at the other one for comparison. The cured crust was 180 grams of dough. It's in my left hand. And then this was the regular one we rolled out, which is 205 grams of dough. You can see the difference in thickness. Right? You can also see this one shrunk about a 1/4 inch all the way around. This one shrunk in a weird way because I cut it like I did. That's my fault. But you get shrinkage no matter what you're doing, especially with this cornmeal crust. This one here, because it's so thin, we should have let it sit on the wire rack a little bit to dry out, but you hear that? I fucking love this. With the cornmeal crust, because you get a lot of the cornmeal, look at these little bits. Because you have the cornmeal dispersed in with the flour, it's more flaky, right? It's not as structured as like a white flour pizza would be. Super thin. You can see the bottom, gorgeous color. So see the difference between the cured crust and the other crust. Oh yeah. Hot. So this one, because of the flavor combination, you get that in your nose first, right? You get that garlic, that spinach, hitting you in the nose first. And then you get the crumbly, flaky dough crust, crisp edges. Probably hear that. So you hear that. It's just a beautiful flavor combination. I was curious. This cornmeal crust, we haven't done the spinach or tomato combo. It works really well. Very earthy, very well-rounded flavors. It's a very grounded flavor of pizza. It's fantastic. They're both just fucking fantastic. So if you get the book, the Chicago Pizza Cookbook, it's available on Amazon. The link is in the thing.